For AgainstCronyCapitalism.org, I'm Nick Sorrentino. So yesterday I talked about how tax breaks are not subsidies. How if an industry or an individual is able to hold on to more of their money, that's not a subsidy. Now, that can still be an example of crony capitalism, and it can still mess with the marketplace, but it's not a subsidy. Today I want to talk about energy subsidies. Typically in this country, when we talk about when people think of energy subsidies, they think of the subsidization of quote-unquote alternative energies, solar, wind, biofuels, and so on. And though these sources of energy are heavily subsidized, what's interesting is that other forms of energy are also heavily subsidized. For instance, coal, oil, nuclear, all lots of subsidies. And I wanted to talk about two specific examples, one in oil and one in nuclear. When it comes to oil, I mean, really, the price that we pay at the pump for a gallon of gasoline is not the total cost of that gallon. We basically, and I'm not going to go into the whole deal here, but essentially we pay for that gallon of gas through taxation and through debt also. And anyway, but I want to talk about one piece of the puzzle, the oil puzzle, and that is that for offshore drillers, the total amount of liability that they can incur is $1 billion. It's limited to $1 billion. Now, for instance, the situation down in the Gulf last summer with BP, they were under the assumption that their total limit of liability was $1 billion. Now, when they were looking around for places to drill, they saw a potential opportunity in a mile of water. And the number crunchers looked at it and said, okay, well, all right, this is going to be a challenge, but the potential revenue that we'll generate from this well is, and this is a completely arbitrary number I'm pulling from nowhere, $5 billion over the life of the well, the Horizon well. And a number of crunchers go back and they say, okay, well, what could we potentially lose in the event of a catastrophic situation? Oh, well, hey, interesting. Under U.S. law, we're limited to $1 billion worth of liability. Now, BP was handed a $20 billion bill by the U.S. government. There are all sorts of weird things that went on with that, but most of this bill has been forgiven. But the point is, when BP was deciding whether or not to drill in a mile of water, they, it was not in the back of their minds, in the front of their minds, they knew that their limit of liability under the law was $1 billion. So it made sense if they were going to make $1 billion plus off the well. A catastrophic situation was unlikely to happen. So it made sense as long as the taxpayer was subsidizing their liability. So basically, BP did business that should never have happened. That oil well disaster in the Gulf should never have happened. Had BP really had to factor what the total cost of a disaster was, it is unlikely they would have drilled where they drilled. So, that's an example, a very real example of how subsidization creates all sorts of just asinine things, and really skews the marketplace. All right, so that's one example. Next example is nuclear. Nuclear is often held up as, it's become more, since Fukushima has become significantly less popular, but for a while there, because nuclear didn't create carbon emissions, a lot of folks were giving it a second look. A lot of folks on the left. Now, the left has always kind of not liked nuclear, and the Republicans have always loved it. And they've loved it so much that they have done everything they can to subsidize the nuclear energy, the nuclear energy industry. For instance, if you build a plant, those plants were all built, now we haven't built one in a long time, but those plants were all built with federally guaranteed loans because nobody really wanted to loan a power company the money that it took to build these things without a federally backed guarantee that they were going to get paid back. That's not a free market right there at all. But yet, over and over and over for decades, politicians have supported this. Then, on the other end, in the event of a catastrophic situation, the Price-Anderson Act essentially caps the limit of liability for a nuclear plant at $10 billion for, in the event of a nuclear radiation emergency. So, if you can get the feds to essentially help you build the plant, and then in the event that things go horribly wrong and you irradiate, a large portion of the countryside and population, your limit of liability is, is $10 billion, which is no small hit, but your company will probably survive. All right, then that's probably a pretty good deal, because in the meantime, once that plant gets turned on, you're generating lots of energy, and you're generating lots of revenue for the company and for shareholders. But the only reason these plants really exist is because the feds have said, we want them to exist. So again, nuclear is not a free market energy at all. Anyway, so when we're having the energy debate, which is frankly the most important debate we can have, I mean, it ties in with the economy, it ties in with national security. It's the whole deal. Energy is vitally important. And as we're trying to figure out how to move forward here, we need to factor in the subsidies, that just permeate every bit of this industry. Interestingly, I have argued that I don't think any form of energy should be subsidized. Alternative, legacy, or whatever. Let the market figure out what makes the most sense. We've never really done that, and it's about time we try. What's interesting is that there's actually a small group of people on the left, and it's getting bigger, who are actually saying, you know what, we're okay with that. You could take away the wind and the solar and the biofuel subsidies if you take away the subsidies for coal, oil, and nuclear. You know what? For a free marketeer, and here at againstcronycapitalism.org, we are free marketeers. That seems to make a lot of sense. Anyway, till next time, I'm Nick Sorrentino.